First of all, I don't have any involvement in the U.S. government's bond rating, so that sounds difficult. But on the state and local government side, Joshua talked about how the proportion of the population that has defined benefit programs has shrunk so dramatically. Well, a very big portion of that smaller group is state and local government employees, where DB pensions are still the rule. There's about 25 million American participants in state and local government plans, 10 million of whom are retired today. Interestingly, about 40%, almost 40% of that total, those individuals do not participate in the Social Security system. The only retirement plan that they have is their state or local government pension. So that's interesting. So how big are the obligations of state and local governments? That depends who's counting and how they're counting, surprisingly. But as reported by the governments themselves, the unfunded liabilities are about $1.6 trillion as of 2016, $1.6 trillion. That is, of course, that's a present value of future benefits. And so what's the discount rate? The reported discount rates are in the range of 7 to 7.5% generally. If you use a different discount rate, a lower discount rate, you can come up with much higher numbers. And Moody's does actually adjust the reported state and local government numbers. We use a private sector type discount rate, a AA bond index rate to discount. And then that 1.6 trillion is a little over $4 trillion. So that's very large. I mean, you mentioned the U.S. economy is 20 trillion. So that's 25% of GDP in state and local government unfunded retirement obligations. I don't know if you're going to ask about solutions, because we don't really provide, we don't provide solutions or advise. We're observers. But we do believe that if this is a problem for the beneficiaries, it's a problem for the employers, and it's a problem for the bondholders. Because if the employer, the bond issuing government, is not able to afford its pension obligations, we believe they will not be able to afford their debt obligations. So we are factoring the size of pension obligations very heavily into our bond rating criteria for governments.
Thanks, Tim. Following up on that and diving into some of the specifics there, ERISA applies, that Josh mentioned, applies to a lot of the corporate plans, but state and local government plans aren't subject to ERISA laws. And I used to be an actuary and valued some of these plans. What do you see in terms of, can you go into a little more specifics in terms of the discount rate they're using, some of the difficulties in terms of the assumptions they're using there, and what can be done, I think, in terms of moving to more realistic assumptions there?
Sure. Okay. But you're correct. There's no external regulation or central regulation of the state and local government universe. There are state laws that apply to local governments in the state, but there's no external regulation on the states. So how's the public sector just, approached measuring the obligations and coming up with the funding policy? They've relied very heavily on your former profession, the actuarial industry. And I think that it's pretty clear that the government sector has not had a very strong understanding of the true risk-adjusted cost of these benefits, of the potential downsides to following the actuarial contribution approach, which is a very long-term approach based on assumptions. And I think governments have not really understood the downside risk of investment volatility and how that hurts the actual accumulation of assets in a pension plan. A target return of 7% is not the same thing as assets accumulating at 7%. Because when there's downside volatility, these mature plans need to sell assets, and they cannot accumulate at their target rates. So I think the issue is that DB pensions are really complex, and the public sector's not done a good job of really understanding all that complexity, and that's seen in the growing unfunded the weak contributions and growing unfunded liabilities.